There is a moment. Most families can describe it exactly. A Sunday dinner, a familiar name that wouldn't come, a story told twice in the same hour, a look exchanged across the table between two adult children who said nothing but understood everything. That moment is not the beginning of memory decline. By the time that moment happens at the dinner table, the brain has usually been changing for 2 years, sometimes 5. After 3 decades working with older adults as a neurologist and cognitive health specialist, I can tell you this with complete certainty. The brain does not fail suddenly. It gives warnings, quiet ones, specific ones, signs that are easy to dismiss as stress or poor sleep or simply getting older. Signs that, if you know what to look for, give you a window, a real, meaningful window to slow what is happening, and in many cases, to push it back far enough that it never reaches the point your family feared it would. I'm Dr. Catherine Merrill, and in this video, I'm going to show you the 7 warning signs that your memory is beginning to decline, and the specific, natural, research-backed strategies that can protect your brain starting today, not eventually, today. Because the brain responds to what you give it. At 65, at 75, even at 85. The window does not close as fast as most people fear, but it does not stay open forever. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now with just your age, nothing else. I want to know who is watching because memory decline looks different at 65 than it does at 80. And if you or someone you love has recently struggled to find a familiar word, a name, a place, something on the tip of the tongue that simply wouldn't come, type the words tip of tongue in your comment. That detail will matter in about 3 minutes. Sign 1. You keep losing words mid-sentence, and what you can do about it. Naturally, let's begin here, because this is the sign that frightens people most. You are in the middle of a sentence. You know exactly what you want to say. The thought is there. The meaning is there. But the word, the specific word you have used 1,000 times, is simply gone. You reach for it. You describe around it. The thing you used to, the kitchen one. And then it comes back. 5 minutes later, in the shower, when you're no longer trying. You tell yourself it's stress, or that you've been tired lately, or that everyone does this. And here is the complicated truth. Everyone does do this occasionally. That is real. But there is a meaningful clinical difference between the occasional word retrieval failure that happens to a healthy brain under stress and the pattern that signals the early decline of language processing in the brain's temporal lobe. The difference is frequency. The difference is progression. Does it happen once a month or once a day? Was it rare 2 years ago and common now? That trajectory is the signal. In neurology, we call this a nomic difficulty, impaired access to the brain's mental lexicon. And in older adults, it is one of the earliest measurable signs of declining connectivity between the hippocampus and the language centers of the brain. Here is the physiology behind it. The brain stores words not in one location, but in a distributed network. The meaning of a word lives in one region. The sound of it lives in another. The muscle memory of how to say it lives in a third. When those connections are strong, retrieval is instant and effortless. But when the white matter pathways connecting those regions begin to thin, as they do in early cognitive decline, retrieval becomes slow, unreliable, effortful, like a road that used to be a highway that has quietly narrowed to a single lane. I had a patient named Eleanor, 73 years old, from North Carolina, a retired English teacher, a woman who had built her entire career on words. She came to me after her daughter noticed that she had started substituting words during conversation. The cold box in the kitchen, instead of refrigerator. The thing that tells the time on the wall instead of clock. Eleanor had dismissed it for over a year. She was embarrassed, she was frightened, and she was convinced it was inevitable. It wasn't. Within 8 months of targeted intervention, dietary changes, cognitive training, and the specific natural strategies I am about to describe, her standardized language assessment scores had measurably improved. That is not a miracle. That is neuroscience. Natural strategies for word retrieval and language processing. First, learn something new with your hands. This sounds counterintuitive for a language problem, but stay with me. Research from the Max Planck Institute for Human, Cognitive, and Brain Sciences found that learning a new manual skill, a musical instrument, knitting, woodworking, painting, strengthens the white matter pathways connecting multiple brain regions simultaneously, including the exact pathways that word retrieval depends on. The brain does not improve through rest. It improves through challenge. New, unfamiliar, slightly difficult challenge that requires the brain to build new connections rather than travel existing ones. 20 to 30 minutes per day of learning something your hands have never done before is one of the most powerful neurological interventions available, and it costs nothing. Second, omega-3 DHA specifically. Not all omega-3s are equal for brain health. DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, is the specific omega-3 fatty acid that makes up approximately 30% of the brain's cerebral cortex. It is the structural fat of brain cell membranes. It is what keeps those membranes fluid, flexible, and capable of rapid signal transmission. As we age, DHA levels in the brain decline, and as DHA declines, the speed and reliability of neural connections declines with it. Research published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease found that older adults with higher DHA levels showed significantly better performance on word recall and verbal fluency tests compared to those with lower levels. The best food sources are fatty fish, salmon, sardines, mackerel, herring, consumed 2 to 3 times per week. For those who do not regularly eat fish, an algae-based DHA supplement provides the same compound without the oceanic source. Aim for 500 to 1,000 milligrams of DHA daily. Discuss with your physician if you are on blood thinners. Third, read aloud for 10 minutes every day. Not silently, aloud. Reading aloud activates the language network in a more complete, integrated way than silent reading does. It requires the visual cortex, the language processing centers, the motor cortex for speech, and the auditory cortex for self-monitoring to all fire simultaneously and in coordination. That coordinated firing strengthens the exact network responsible for word retrieval. A newspaper, a novel, a magazine article, 10 minutes every morning. Simple, free, and neurologically significant. Fourth, address blood pressure. High blood pressure is one of the leading and most preventable causes of white matter damage in the aging brain. Each episode of elevated pressure creates microscopic stress in the tiny blood vessels feeding brain tissue. Over years, that stress accumulates into measurable white matter lesions, damage to the exact pathways that word retrieval depends on. Managing blood pressure through diet, movement, stress reduction, and, when necessary, medication is not just a heart intervention. It is a brain intervention, possibly the most important one available. If you are still watching and finding this useful, type the number 1 in the comments right now, because the next sign is one that almost every family dismisses as personality, until it is too late to dismiss it anymore. Sign 2. You ask the same question more than once, and what you can do about it. Naturally, this one is harder to notice in yourself. It usually starts with someone else pointing it out: a spouse, a grown child, a close friend. "Mom, you already asked me that." "Dad, we talked about this yesterday." "You mentioned that 3 times this week." And the response, almost every time, is the same: "No, I didn't." Not defensiveness for its own sake, genuine disbelief, because the person asking the repeated question has no memory of asking it before. That is the detail that matters. It is not simply forgetting the answer. It is forgetting that the question was asked at all. That distinction is clinically significant. The hippocampus, the brain's primary memory formation center, is responsible for encoding new experiences into long-term storage. When the hippocampus is functioning normally, asking a question creates a memory trace. "I asked about Sunday dinner. The answer was 1 o'clock." When the hippocampus begins to fail, that encoding step is disrupted. The question was asked, the answer was given, but no memory trace was created. So the brain, genuinely unaware, asks again. This is not confusion. This is not stubbornness. This is the hippocampus failing to write new information to long-term storage. I once treated a man named Robert, 78 years old, from Virginia, a retired naval officer, precise, disciplined, deeply proud of his mental sharpness. His wife had been keeping a quiet journal for almost 8 months before she finally brought him to see me. She had written down every repeated question, every story told twice, every plan discussed and then discussed again as though for the first time. 17 entries in 8 months. Robert had no memory of any of them. That journal was one of the most important clinical documents I have ever reviewed, because it told me not just what was happening, but how long it had been happening, and it gave us time. Natural strategies for hippocampal memory encoding. First, lion's mane mushroom. Of all the natural compounds studied for cognitive health, lion's mane has generated some of the most compelling and reproducible evidence in recent years. Lion's mane, Hericium erinaceus, contains 2 unique compounds, hericinones and erinacines. These compounds have been shown in multiple studies to stimulate the production of nerve growth factor, a protein that supports the survival, growth, and maintenance of neurons in the brain, including neurons in the hippocampus. A landmark double-blind placebo-controlled trial published in Phytotherapy Research found that older adults who took lion's mane extract daily showed significant improvements in cognitive function scores compared to the placebo group, with no adverse effects. Importantly, those improvements reversed when supplementation was stopped, suggesting that the brain was actively responding to the compound while it was present. Typical doses studied range from 500 to 1,000 milligrams of extract daily, available in capsule, powder, or as a whole cooked mushroom. Second, spaced repetition practice. This is a technique borrowed from educational neuroscience with profound implications for hippocampal health. Instead of trying to remember things by reviewing them repeatedly in one sitting, which is how most people try to memorize, spaced repetition involves reviewing information at increasing intervals over time. Day 1, Day 3, Day 7, Day 14. Each retrieval attempt forces the hippocampus to actively reconstruct the memory, strengthening the neural pathway a little more each time. Keep a small notebook. Write down 3 things each morning that you want to remember from the previous day. Review them the next day, then 3 days later, then a week later. You are training the hippocampus the same way you train a muscle, with resistance, with repetition over time, with deliberate effort. Third, reduce alcohol consumption significantly. This is not a comfortable recommendation for everyone, but the evidence is unambiguous. Alcohol is directly neurotoxic to the hippocampus. Even moderate, regular alcohol consumption, 1 to 2 drinks daily, has been associated in longitudinal studies with measurable hippocampal volume reduction and accelerated memory decline in adults over 60. The aging brain is simply more vulnerable to alcohol's neurotoxic effects than the younger brain. If memory is a concern, alcohol needs to be an honest part of that conversation. Fourth, prioritize deep sleep specifically. Memory consolidation, the process by which the brain transfers short-term experiences into long-term storage, happens almost entirely during deep, slow-wave sleep. Not light sleep, not REM sleep, deep sleep. When deep sleep is disrupted or shortened, the hippocampus cannot complete the consolidation process. Memories formed during the day are not properly stored, and the brain loses the ability to access them reliably. Research from UC Berkeley found that the deep sleep deficit associated with normal aging was directly correlated with reduced memory performance the following day. Strategies that specifically improve deep sleep quality. Keep the bedroom cool, 65 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Eliminate screens for 90 minutes before bed. Avoid alcohol, which suppresses deep sleep even when it aids initial onset. Consider magnesium glycinate at bedtime. Research shows it measurably increases slow-wave sleep duration in older adults. Sign 3. Getting lost in familiar places, and what you can do about it naturally. This one tends to arrive quietly. You have driven to your daughter's house 100 times. You know every turn. But one afternoon you find yourself on a street you don't recognize. You turned somewhere automatically and now nothing looks right. You find your way eventually. You don't tell anyone. You tell yourself it was a moment of distraction. Or you are walking through your own neighborhood, the same loop you have walked for 15 years, and for just a moment, a block looks unfamiliar, wrong somehow. You keep walking. It passes. You file it away and say nothing. But you remember it. In ways that other things no longer get remembered, you remember that moment. Because somewhere, quietly, you knew it wasn't right. In neurology, spatial disorientation in familiar environments is a specific and significant red flag for early decline in the entorhinal cortex, the brain region that processes spatial navigation and sits directly adjacent to the hippocampus. This is the region that Alzheimer's pathology almost always attacks first, before memory, before language, before anything else. The GPS of the brain begins to flicker before the rest of the system shows any obvious sign of distress. I treated a woman named Margaret, 70 years old, sharp, articulate, socially active. She came to me not because of memory problems. She insisted her memory was fine, but because her husband had noticed that she now always asked him to drive, even on routes she had navigated alone for 20 years. When I asked her directly, she described 3 separate incidents over 6 months where familiar routes had felt suddenly wrong. She had not connected them. She had not told anyone. Her cognitive testing was nearly normal, but her spatial processing scores showed early decline. We had caught something that would not have shown up in routine assessment for another year or 2. That early catch changed the trajectory of her care. Natural strategies for spatial memory and entorhinal cortex health. First, physical exercise, specifically aerobic. Of everything in this video, this may be the single most powerful intervention. Not supplements, not diet, not brain games. Aerobic exercise. A landmark study from the University of Pittsburgh found that older adults who engaged in regular aerobic exercise showed a measurable increase in hippocampal volume, actual physical growth of the memory center, compared to those who did stretching only. The hippocampus and entorhinal cortex are connected. What strengthens one supports the other. The mechanism is a protein called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, often described as fertilizer for the brain. Aerobic exercise is the most powerful known trigger of BDNF production in the human brain. You do not need to run. You do not need a gym. A brisk 30-minute walk 5 days a week, brisk enough that conversation is slightly effortful, is sufficient to produce measurable BDNF increases and meaningful cognitive protection. That is the minimum effective dose, and it is available to almost everyone. Second, navigation challenges. Use your brain's GPS deliberately. GPS devices and smartphone maps are extraordinary tools. They are also quietly contributing to spatial memory decline in older adults by removing the cognitive demand of active navigation. Once a week, drive or walk a familiar route without assistance. Rely on your own spatial memory. Make a mental map before you leave. This deliberate practice keeps the entorhinal cortex engaged and maintains the neural pathways it depends on. Use technology, but not always. Give your brain's navigation system regular workouts. Third, turmeric, specifically curcumin. The research on curcumin and brain health has quietly become some of the most exciting in cognitive neuroscience. A study from UCLA, published in the American Journal of Geriatric Psychiatry, followed older adults with mild memory complaints over 18 months. Those who took a bioavailable form of curcumin daily showed significant improvements in memory and attention, and brain imaging revealed measurably reduced amyloid and tau accumulation in the regions associated with early Alzheimer's pathology, including the entorhinal cortex. The key word is bioavailable. Standard turmeric powder has poor absorption. Look for curcumin formulated with piperine, a black pepper extract that increases absorption by up to 2,000%, or a phospholipid-bound form such as Meriva or Longvida. Typical studied doses range from 80 to 500 milligrams of bioavailable curcumin daily. Fourth, reduce chronic inflammation through diet. Neuroinflammation, chronic low-grade inflammation in the brain, is now understood to be one of the primary drivers of entorhinal and hippocampal deterioration. The foods most strongly linked to neuroinflammation in older adults are refined sugar and high fructose corn syrup, ultra-processed foods and seed oils, red and processed meats consumed in excess, white bread, and refined carbohydrates. The foods most strongly linked to reduced neuroinflammation: extra virgin olive oil, blueberries and dark berries, leafy green vegetables, particularly kale and spinach, fatty fish, walnuts. These are not suggestions. They are interventions, and their effects on brain health are documented in peer-reviewed literature going back decades. Sign 4. Personality and mood changes nobody can explain, and what you can do about it naturally. This is the sign families struggle with most, not because it is subtle, but because it is painful. The person you have known for 40 years begins to seem different. Not dramatically, not all at once, but there is more irritability than there used to be, more suspicion, a quickness to anger that was never there before, a withdrawal from activities they once loved, an anxiety that arrives without a clear cause and does not respond to reassurance. And the family says, "She's just stressed. He's always been stubborn. It's the news. It upsets everyone. But something is different, and somewhere beneath the explanations, the family knows it. What most people do not understand is that the prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for emotional regulation, impulse control, social judgment, and patience, is among the earliest regions affected by the neurological changes that precede memory decline. Before the memory visibly fails, the emotional regulation system frays. Frustration arrives faster. Tolerance drops. Social filters thin. Not because the person has changed who they are, but because the brain region that moderates who they are is working harder for less result. I treated a man named George, 76 years old, from Florida. His wife brought him in, not for memory concerns, but because he had become, in her words, someone I don't entirely recognize. He had become suspicious of neighbors he had been friendly with for years. He had stopped enjoying the woodworking hobby that had defined his retirement. He became tearful unexpectedly and then dismissed it as nothing. His memory testing was borderline, but his behavioral profile was consistent with early frontotemporal changes. The family had been trying to manage what they thought was a personality conflict. It was neurology, and it needed a different response. Natural strategies for mood, emotional regulation, and prefrontal health. First, social engagement, treated as medicine, not leisure. Research from Rush University Medical Center's Memory and Aging Project, one of the longest-running cognitive health studies in the world, found that older adults with rich, frequent social lives showed significantly slower cognitive decline and lower rates of Alzheimer's diagnosis than those who were socially isolated. The mechanism is not fully understood, but the pattern is undeniable. Social interaction demands simultaneous use of language processing, emotional regulation, working memory, and attention, all systems that decline when unused. Social engagement is not a comfort measure. It is a neurological intervention. Schedule regular social contact the same way you schedule a medical appointment. Not when you feel like it, regularly, consistently. Second, phosphatidylserine. This is a phospholipid, a fat molecule, that makes up a significant portion of the membranes of neurons in the prefrontal cortex. As we age, phosphatidylserine levels decline, and as they decline, the signaling efficiency of prefrontal neurons declines with them. Multiple clinical trials, including studies reviewed and accepted by the FDA for qualified health claims, have found that phosphatidylserine supplementation reduces cognitive decline symptoms, improves mood, and supports memory performance in older adults. Typical doses studied range from 100 to 300 milligrams daily. Soy-derived and sunflower-derived forms are both available and well tolerated. Third, address chronic stress directly. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, is directly neurotoxic to the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex when chronically elevated. This is not metaphorical. Brain imaging studies show measurably smaller hippocampal volumes in people with chronically high cortisol levels. And the sources of chronic cortisol elevation in older adults are often invisible. Poor sleep, social isolation, chronic pain, unmanaged anxiety, and long-term grief. Identifying and addressing the source of chronic stress is not a luxury. It is neuroprotection. Mindfulness-based stress reduction, even 10 minutes of daily quiet, focused breathing, has been shown in multiple trials to measurably reduce cortisol levels and improve prefrontal function in older adults. Fourth, B vitamin complex, specifically B6, B12, and folate. The connection between B vitamin deficiency and cognitive decline is one of the most replicated findings in nutritional neuroscience. B vitamins are essential for controlling homocysteine, an amino acid that, when elevated, is directly toxic to brain tissue and strongly associated with accelerated cognitive decline. Research from Oxford University found that B vitamin supplementation in older adults with elevated homocysteine reduced brain atrophy by up to 53% over a 2-year period, compared to a placebo group. 53%. That is not a marginal finding. That is a profound result from something as accessible as a B-complex supplement. Ask your doctor to check your homocysteine and B12 levels. These are simple blood tests. The results could change how your cognitive future is managed. Sign 5. Difficulty following conversations or storylines, and what you can do about it. Naturally, picture a family gathering. Everyone is talking at once. It's loud, it's warm. It's the kind of scene you have sat in 100 times. But something feels different now. You find yourself falling behind. By the time you process one part of the conversation, 3 more things have been said. You laugh a beat too late. You respond to something that was said 2 exchanges ago. Later, watching television, a show you have followed for 2 seasons, you realize you cannot track the storyline anymore. The characters seem to overlap. The plot shifts feel confusing. You watch it twice, and the second time is not much clearer. You blame it on the writing, or the noise at dinner, or your hearing. But the hearing test was fine. What is declining here is working memory, the brain's ability to hold several pieces of information in active awareness simultaneously while processing new incoming information. It is the brain's mental desktop, and when the desktop begins to shrink, when fewer items can be held open at once, the world begins to feel faster than it used to. Not because the world changed, because the processing space did. Natural strategies for working memory and processing speed. First, the MIND diet. The MIND diet, a hybrid of the Mediterranean and DASH diets, was specifically designed and studied for brain health in aging adults. A study from Rush University found that strict adherence to the MIND diet was associated with cognitive function equivalent to being 7.5 years younger, compared to those with the lowest adherence. 7.5 years from food choices alone. The MIND diet emphasizes green leafy vegetables, at least 6 servings per week. All other vegetables, at least 1 additional serving per day. Berries, at least 2 servings per week. Nuts, at least 5 servings per week. Olive oil as the primary cooking fat. Whole grains, at least 3 servings per day. Fish, at least once per week. Beans, at least 4 meals per week. Poultry, at least twice per week. Wine, 1 glass per day if you drink at all, though given the hippocampal evidence discussed earlier, this remains a point of ongoing scientific debate. Foods to minimize: red meat, butter and margarine, cheese, pastries, sweets, and fried or fast food. This is not a temporary diet. It is a lifetime architecture for the brain. Second, dual task training. Working memory responds to challenge. Dual task training, doing 2 cognitive or physical tasks simultaneously, has been shown in multiple trials to improve working memory capacity and processing speed in older adults. Examples: walk while reciting the alphabet backward. Cook a new recipe while listening to an audiobook. Play a simple card game while having a conversation. The slight difficulty and mild frustration you feel when attempting dual tasks is the feeling of your working memory being stretched. That stretch is the training. Embrace it rather than avoiding it. Third, ginkgo biloba. Ginkgo biloba remains one of the most studied herbal compounds in cognitive neuroscience, with a body of literature spanning over 40 years. Its primary mechanisms relevant to working memory are increased cerebral blood flow, antioxidant protection of neuronal membranes, reduction in platelet aggregation that can impede microcirculation in the brain. A meta-analysis published in Human Psychopharmacology found that ginkgo biloba extract significantly improved processing speed and working memory in older adults with mild cognitive complaints. Typical studied doses are 120 to 240 milligrams daily of standardized extract, EGB761 formulation. Discuss with your physician if you are on blood thinners or antiplatelet medications. Fourth, reduce multitasking with technology. This is counterintuitive in an era that celebrates multitasking. But research from Stanford University found that heavy media multitaskers, people who frequently switch between screens, apps, and information sources, showed measurably worse working memory performance than those who focused on one task at a time. The brain is not strengthened by constant switching. It is fatigued by it. Designate 1 hour of your morning as a single task time. No phone, no television. One activity completed fully. That hour of focused, undistracted engagement is more cognitively protective than 3 hours of scattered, fragmented attention. Sign 6. Confusion about time, dates, or recent events, and what you can do about it. Naturally, this sign is subtle at first. You write the wrong year on a check. Not the first time. It happens every January. But this is July. You cannot remember whether something happened last week or last month. The events feel equally recent. The timeline feels compressed. You miss an appointment, not because you forgot it entirely, but because you were convinced it was a different day. Your internal calendar, which used to run quietly and reliably in the background, has become unreliable. And here is what makes this sign particularly worth noting. The brain's sense of time, its ability to sequence events and place them accurately in the recent past, depends on a network that includes the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, and the brain's circadian regulation system. When any of these systems is disrupted, temporal orientation suffers. And in older adults, disrupted circadian rhythm is both a symptom and a cause of accelerating cognitive decline. They reinforce each other in the wrong direction. I once treated a 74-year-old woman named Patricia who had been dismissed by 2 physicians as simply anxious and disorganized. When I reviewed her history carefully, the temporal confusion had been present for over a year. She had missed 6 appointments across 3 different providers. Each time, the date confusion had been the explanation. Her circadian rhythm assessment showed a significantly disrupted sleep-wake cycle, combined with early prefrontal changes on her cognitive imaging. Both needed to be addressed. Neither had been identified until we looked for both. Natural strategies for temporal orientation and circadian health. First, consistent sleep and wake times, non-negotiable. The brain's circadian system is regulated by light, temperature, and, critically, the consistency of sleep and wake timing. Every day, including weekends, including days when you feel tired. Going to bed and waking at the same time every day within a 30-minute window is the single most effective non-pharmaceutical intervention for circadian rhythm stabilization in older adults. The brain uses this consistency to calibrate its internal clock. When the schedule is irregular, the clock drifts. And when the clock drifts, temporal orientation suffers. Second, morning light exposure. The brain's master clock, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, is reset each morning by exposure to bright, natural light. 10 to 15 minutes of outdoor light exposure within the first hour of waking is the strongest known signal to the circadian system that the day has begun. This is not about vitamin D. This is about timing. The light tells the clock what time it is, and a well-calibrated clock supports the temporal processing networks that orientation and sequencing depend on. Open the curtains. Step outside with your morning tea or coffee. 10 minutes every morning. Third, phosphatidylcholine-rich foods. Choline is a precursor to acetylcholine, the primary neurotransmitter of memory, attention, and temporal processing. As acetylcholine levels decline with age, the ability to sequence and orient in time becomes less reliable. Foods highest in choline. Eggs, particularly the yolk. Beef liver. Salmon. Soybeans and edamame. Shiitake mushrooms. Research from Boston University found that higher dietary choline intake was associated with significantly better cognitive performance and reduced white matter lesion volume in the aging brain. An egg a day is not just acceptable for most older adults. For brain health, it may be essential. Fourth, keep a structured daily log. This is not just a compensatory strategy, it is a therapeutic one. Writing down daily events, what happened, when, in sequence, actively engages the hippocampal prefrontal network responsible for temporal processing. The act of organizing the day into narrative sequence exercises the same brain systems that are being asked to do this automatically in everyday life. 5 minutes each evening. What happened today? In order. Written down. Over weeks, this practice strengthens the neural habit of temporal sequencing, and it creates an external record that reduces the anxiety that comes with not trusting your own timeline. Sign 7. Withdrawing from activities you once loved, and what you can do about it. Naturally, this is the last sign, and in some ways, it is the most heartbreaking. Not because it is the most dramatic, but because it is the most human. You used to love bridge, the strategy of it, the social ritual, the weekly gathering with friends you had known for decades. And then, one week you didn't go. Too tired, you said. The next week, something came up. And then, quietly, you stopped going at all. You used to read a book a week. Now you get through a few pages and find your attention sliding. You read the same paragraph 3 times. You put the book down. You used to love cooking for the family, the planning of it, the creativity. Now the complexity feels like too much. And when people ask why you've stopped, the answer feels impossible to explain. I just don't feel like it. But that isn't quite right. It is not that you don't want to do these things. It is that somewhere, quietly, they have begun to feel harder than they should, and the brain, in its way, has begun protecting you from the evidence of that difficulty. Withdrawal is not laziness, it is avoidance. And avoidance is one of the brain's earliest and most consistent responses to declining cognitive confidence. In neurology, we call this decreased spontaneous activity, and it is a behavioral marker for reduced dopaminergic signaling and declining cognitive reserve. The brain is withdrawing from challenge because challenge has become effortful in new ways. And here is the cruel paradox. The withdrawal that feels protective is actually accelerating the decline, because the brain, unlike the body, does not recover through rest from cognitive challenges. It recovers through engagement. Natural strategies for cognitive reserve and re-engagement. First, the concept of cognitive reserve and how to build it. Cognitive reserve is the brain's resilience, its ability to tolerate damage and dysfunction without showing outward symptoms. It is built through education and lifelong learning, complex occupational engagement, rich social networks, diverse cognitive challenges over a lifetime. Research from Columbia University found that individuals with high cognitive reserve could sustain twice as much physical brain pathology before showing symptoms of cognitive decline compared to those with low reserve. The brain with more reserve has more alternative pathways to route around damage. It is never too late to build reserve. Every new skill learned, every book completed, every challenging conversation, every creative project pursued. These are deposits into a reserve account that pays interest in cognitive years. Second, Bacopa monnieri. This Ayurvedic herb has been studied in rigorous clinical trials for its effect on memory consolidation, attention, and cognitive processing speed. A meta-analysis published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology reviewed 9 randomized controlled trials and found that Bacopa monnieri significantly improved memory acquisition, retention, and processing speed in older adults. The proposed mechanisms include increased cerebral blood flow, enhanced synaptic communication in the hippocampus, antioxidant protection of neuronal membranes, modulation of acetylcholine activity. The key caveat with Bacopa: effects take time. Studies typically show meaningful results after 8 to 12 weeks of consistent use. This is not a fast supplement. It is a slow, cumulative one. And in cognitive health, slow and cumulative is exactly what the brain responds to. Typical studied doses: 300 to 450 milligrams of standardized extract daily. Third, reintroduce one abandoned activity, deliberately, gently. Not all of them at once. 1. Choose the activity that brought the most joy before the withdrawal began. Not the most cognitively demanding one, the most emotionally resonant one. And return to it with a gentle, judgment-free commitment. Once a week, for 1 hour. If it is harder than it used to be, that is acceptable. The brain does not need you to be perfect at it. It needs you to be in it. The neural pathways that supported that activity do not disappear quickly, but they do thin from disuse. Re-engagement begins to restore them, slowly at first, then with increasing ease. Fourth, purpose and meaning, the most underestimated brain protector. Research from Rush University's Memory and Aging Project found that older adults who reported a strong sense of purpose, a feeling that their life had direction and meaning, showed significantly lower rates of Alzheimer's diagnosis, lower levels of amyloid accumulation, and better cognitive function across all domains compared to those without a defined sense of purpose. This was not explained by physical health differences or social engagement differences. Purpose itself, independent of other factors, was neuroprotective. Volunteer work, mentorship, creative projects, faith communities, caregiving, teaching. Whatever gives your days direction and meaning is not separate from your cognitive health. It is one of its deepest foundations. Bringing it together. 7 signs. Words slipping away. Questions asked twice. Familiar places feeling wrong. Personality quietly changing. Conversations becoming harder to follow. The calendar becoming unreliable. The activities you loved being set aside. None of these is a death sentence, not one. But each of them is a signal, and signals are only useful if you receive them in time. The research is clear. The brain is plastic. It changes in response to what you give it or what you take away. It responds to exercise, to nutrition, to sleep, to challenge, to connection, to purpose. At 65, at 75, even at 85. The window does not close as quickly as most people fear, but it requires that you stop explaining the signs away and start responding to them. What to do today? Sit with a piece of paper. Write down every sign from this video that you have noticed in yourself or in someone you love. Be honest. The paper will not judge you. Take that paper to your doctor. Say, I want to talk about cognitive health. Here is what I have noticed. A good physician will take that seriously. It may lead to a referral to a neurologist. It may lead to blood tests, B12, homocysteine, thyroid. It may lead to a cognitive assessment that gives you a baseline and a roadmap. Begin the natural strategies in this video now, alongside that medical conversation, not instead of it. Exercise first, sleep next, then nutrition, then targeted supplementation, in that order of priority, because that is the order the research supports. Your brain is asking for attention, not tomorrow, now. I want to leave you with something. In all my years in neurology, the patients who fared best were not the ones with the mildest cases. They were the ones who acted earliest. The woman who came in because her daughter noticed a word she couldn't find. The man who kept the appointment his wife had made for him, even though he was sure there was nothing wrong. The couple who started walking together every morning the week after a difficult diagnosis, not because they were told to, but because they refused to do nothing. They were not extraordinary people. They were people who decided that what their brain was telling them deserved to be taken seriously. You can be that person. Drop a comment with the word memory if this video gave you something you didn't have before you pressed play. Share this with someone who has been explaining away the signs, someone whose family has been exchanging looks across the dinner table and saying nothing. This video was made for them. Subscribe to this channel because every week I bring you research-based information about the aging brain. Honest, practical, and grounded in science. Next video. The 5 daily habits that neurologists say accelerate memory loss in older adults, and the 2 most common ones that almost every senior over 65 is still doing without realizing the damage they cause. You will want to see that. Until then, protect your brain. It holds everything.